Recently, a company called VicSeed reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in trying out their new wireless probe meat thermometer. And since I'm a big fan of using digital meat thermometers, I said, sure. I'm already smoking and barbecuing something pretty much all the time anyway, so it didn't really put me out to give this new meat thermometer a try. So in this video, I'm going to be unboxing and trying out, and I guess ultimately reviewing the VicSeed wireless probe meat thermometer. And to give it a thorough trial run, today I'm going to be smoking a pork shoulder to make pulled pork. So let's get into this box and take a look at the VicSeed wireless probe thermometer. So here's the VicSeed wireless meat thermometer, and I'm taking a look at it for the first time. So here we've got the main temperature probe as well as the little base station case, instruction manual, and the little USB-C charging cable. Pretty self-explanatory. Now, from reading the product description of this meat thermometer system, there's a couple of pretty cool features. First, it charges by being in this little base station. So I just have to plug this little thing into a USB-C charger, that little port there. And as soon as I remove this probe from the case, it's supposed to automatically connect and be ready to use. And there doesn't seem to be any juice right out of the box, so it looks like I'm gonna have to charge this thing before we really go any further. So I guess I'll do that and we'll be right back. All right, I think we're charged up now, and I'm gonna try turning this thing on. And it looks like it turned on as soon as I removed the probe. It's currently set to Celsius, so let me see if I can change that. And I can't seem to actually figure out how to switch this from Celsius to Fahrenheit. And I don't really know what I'm doing with Celsius, so I think I need to investigate a little further. But in the meantime, I want to run through a few of the features of this thing per the product information. It says when it's fully charged that this thing will last and be usable for at least 72 hours. So I guess if you've got a really long cook, this thing's going to be just fine for that. I can't imagine I'm going to need to have this thing actively measuring things for 72 straight hours. I mentioned that pulling this probe out of the case turns the docking station and the LED screen on automatically and pairs it, and it's ready to go. And I can tell just by holding the end of this probe with my warm fingers that it already is making the temperature go up. Though it's in Celsius right now, and I sure don't really know what that means, but the temperature is going up anyway, so it's clearly paired. The probe is food grade stainless steel, and the product information says that it will work in a oven, grill, or smoker up to 572 degrees Fahrenheit. And I don't know about you, but I sure never smoke or bake anything as high as 572 degrees Fahrenheit, so that shouldn't be a problem. Now, a feature that I really like about this, and I don't know if it's a common feature among this kind of wireless thermometer, but it's actually a dual sensor thermometer in that it will measure both internal temperature of meat via the probe itself and the ambient temperature of your smoker or oven or whatever through the sensor in the sort of end of this probe that doesn't go into the meat. So whereas with my older wired thermometer probe system, I need to have a couple of these in there, one in the meat itself and another one just kind of in the smoker somewhere. The wireless one from VicSeed, I don't need to have that apparently, and I can just stick this in there and it'll do everything. Of course, as long as I'm only needing to cook one piece of meat. Otherwise, I guess I'd need to get a second probe altogether. Now, while this probe is paired with the little base station, it's said to only work from about 10 feet away. And that's fine if I'm just going to keep this little base station next to the smoker or whatever. But I also like to kind of have it in the house, around the property, so I can keep an eye on my heat level in the smoker when I'm not right near it. And that's where the mobile app comes in on this particular wireless thermometer. And I know a lot of them these days do that. I've never had one that connects to a phone before, so I'm interested in trying that out. And if I understand correctly, the probe communicates with the base station, and the base station will communicate with my phone via Bluetooth, and the product information says that that will work if my phone is up to 229 feet away, which I'm not sure where that measurement comes from. Is that just the sort of standard limitation of Bluetooth in general? I don't know, but that seems like a plenty long enough distance for anything that I would need to use it for. Anyway, I'm gonna download this mobile app per the instructions and check it out, and then we're gonna take a look at that in a minute. Okay, I've got the app installed and I've been fooling around with it a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and kind of start from the beginning, and it's already connected to the device, and it did that pretty much automatically. You just have to make sure the probe is out of the base so it connects and is sort of active. Okay, to start a cook, I pretty much have to just press target, and it gives me some options for meat. And I wish there was one that just said custom so I can just set what I want, but it kind of makes me pick one. So I'll go with pork. And if I'm smoking a pork shoulder and I'm going to want that to be, like 190 degrees by the time it's done, I'm just going to notch this one up and select well done. And then I got to press start cook, and then it's going. And I can see again when I hold the end of the probe, I can watch the temperature go up. And by the way, it did switch to Fahrenheit as soon as I connected the app to it. It's set to Fahrenheit in the app, and that made it change to Fahrenheit on the device itself. So I guess at least there's a way to do it, but if you're gonna try to use this device without the app, you're gonna have a tricky time, I guess, if you want Fahrenheit. Anyway, I can see right here at the top my internal temperature. It kind of tracks the progress of the food temperature. But something that troubles me a little bit right away that I notice is, of course, I can see the internal temperature, which is measured by the probe, but I can't really see the ambient temperature. All it's telling me for ambient temperature is the word low. But when I touch the word low, it tells me ambient temperature is too low to display a reading. So I hope I can assume that as soon as I put this into an actual smoker or oven, it will display a temperature there. So I guess we're going to find that out when we do our test cook. And there's various settings in here where I can mess with things like, do I want an alarm when the ambient temperature gets to a certain high or low? So I can, make sure to manage my fire and heat in my smoker. Anyway, assuming that I'll actually get an ambient temperature number when this thing actually goes into my smoker, so far I think it has everything that I need and want out of a probe thermometer. And something else I'm noticing is that comparing it to my old wired probe, this wireless one is quite a bit thicker, and I guess that doesn't really matter. I guess maybe it has to be that way for whatever technology is in it. But it did kind of stand out to me how much thicker the wireless one is. Again, probably doesn't matter. So I guess at this point there's nothing left to do except start a cook and see how this thing performs. And today I'm going to be doing a pork shoulder. That's right, smoked pulled pork on the offset. It's going to be a somewhat lengthy cook, as pork shoulders are. So I'm going to quickly get this thing prepared and seasoned up and get the smoker fired up and ready to go. And when I'm ready to put that pork shoulder into the smoker, I'll just go ahead and insert the wireless probe. And because this is my first time using it, and I want to compare how it works and how it acts with my old wired probe system, I'll go ahead and stick one of my wired probes in there too, as well as a second wired probe just in the smoker so I can monitor ambient temperature. Just compare, see how the temperature readings for both internal and ambient measure up between the wired and the wireless. Hopefully they're the same. So we'll just check in periodically throughout this cook, see how this thing's doing. All right, so the pork shoulder's in the smoker. I've got both the wireless probe thermometer and my older wired probe thermometer in there. And on the wireless readout for the wired probe, I'm reading an ambient temp of 267 and an internal temp of 47. And on the app for the VicSeed wireless probe, I'm looking at 45 internal and 195 ambient. So right off the top, the ambient is quite a bit different between the two. And it could have something to do with the placement of the probes, but I still don't see how that makes any sense. The wired probe for the ambient temp is sort of pretty much at grate level near the back of the smoker. Now, I took care to put the wireless probe near the back of the pork so it would be in a similar placement in the smoker, at least with regards to front to back. But it's a little bit higher up off the grate since it's sticking out of the pork shoulder. And since the heat's going to be hotter, a little higher up in the smoker, I don't really understand how or why it can show the ambient is that much lower. I'm a little worried about that, but I guess I'll see how it goes as this cook progresses on, and I suppose we'll check in a little bit. All right, so we've been going about 38 minutes or so now, and a couple things I've noticed is that as time's gone on, my ambient temperatures between the two different probes have really come together quite a bit, and they're almost the same now. 247 on the old wired probe, 245 on the new wireless probe. So I'd say that that's close enough to not really concern me. Though I will say that now the internal temp has diverged a little bit with 71 on the wired probe and 64 on the internal. Though I guess I could chalk that up to maybe how deep I put the probe into the pork shoulder. Another thing I observed just a minute ago that I don't love is that probe base station randomly disconnected from my phone. The Bluetooth connection failed, and I got a message that said, oh, make sure you get a little closer to the base station, which is kind of crazy because I was just in the basement of my house, which as far as a direct line goes is probably, only about 50 feet away from that smoker. And I was down there a while before it disconnected. So it's only happened once so far, but I don't love the interruption in that connection. And it didn't reconnect until I came back up the stairs. Anyway, we've got a long while to go in this smoke, so I'll check back in a little while if anything of note has happened. Okay, we're about 2 hours in now, and the shoulder is smoking along and looking pretty good. And for the most part, the ambient temperature between my two thermometers have been close to consistent, but at this very moment, the wireless probe is showing 283 when my wired probe is showing 241, 242. And it seems like the wireless probe starts to act funny every time it disconnects and reconnects, which unfortunately has been happening a bunch of times. It might only happen once every 15 minutes, or it might happen a few times within 5 minutes. And it just seems to depend where in my house I am, which again is kind of frustrating because anywhere that I am in the house is not especially far from the smoker. So my impression at this very moment is that this is a pretty good setup as long as I'm never really moving that far away from the smoker itself. And it's a little concerning how wildly different the ambient temperature sometimes reads, but after a few more minutes, it'll sort of normalize and come back in line with the wired probe. And by the way, this wired probe system I'm using from ThermPro is not a very expensive one. It is not top of the line. I really just liked it because it had this separate wireless unit that communicates with its sort of base station that the wires plug into. And so far, it seems to have a lot more range than the Bluetooth phone app deal with the wireless probe. And that's a main reason right now that I'm kind of glad that I have the wired probes in there along with the wireless for this cook. Because no matter what, it's reliable and consistent and steady. And there's just been a couple of funny things about this wireless probe that I'm not so sure about. But anyway, we're going to let it keep going. I got a lot of hours left in the cook, and we'll come back in a little while. So we've reached the time in the cook where the temperature is pretty much stalled, and now is the time when I like to pull the pork shoulder out of there, give it the old aluminum foil half wrap, put it back in, and let it smoke away until we hit about 195, 200 degrees, something like that. So I figured it was a good time to check in once again. It's been a few hours. We're on getting close to hour 6.5 of the cook. And the difference in temperature readings between the wired probe thermometer system and the VicSeed wireless probe has stayed pretty consistent, meaning the difference between the internal heat and the ambient heat between the two has stayed about the same. And in both cases, the VicSeed wireless probe is reading higher, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 degrees on both counts. And what's weird is throughout most of this cook, the VicSeed wireless number for the ambient has been higher, but right now it's reading lower, and that's pretty strange. However, the internal still reading higher, which has been pretty much the case this whole time. Anyway, I guess we'll stop here until it's time to take the pork shoulder out and see what we're dealing with. So after many hours, my pork shoulder is finally done and cooked to an internal temperature of about 205 degrees. So I'm bringing it in the house, wrapping it up with aluminum foil, and letting it rest for somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour. And at long last, it's finally ready to pull apart and shred up. mix in a little sauce and some more seasonings, and I can officially call this pulled pork done. So I think that's pretty much all there is to cover, but there is one more thing that I'm a little curious about. Now, obviously, after this thing sitting in the smoker for a good 8 hours, it's gonna be, quite dirty on the part that was exposed and not in the pork. And if you haven't dealt with meat thermometers in a smoker before, it certainly looks like it's absolutely covered in soot, but it's really quite baked on there to the point where it's more of a stain at this point than loose soot. In fact, if I rub this paper towel all over it, you can see that it's not really going anywhere. So that is to say, there's not really any cleaning this unless I really wanted to get in there with some kind of solvent and scrub the heck out of it. But considering that this thing is wireless and has an external ambient temperature probe as part of this exposed area, I'm kind of curious that if over time that will cause any kind of a problem. And what I'm also not 100% sure about is if the probe itself needs to recharge. I would have to think that there's some kind of battery in it and that it needs to be charged by, snapping into the little base station. And it does snap into place, and the base station seems to recognize that I've done so, and all these little metal contacts sure make me think that it's doing something like charging it. So I guess I don't exactly know how the technology in that little thing works, but I do know that everything seems to work as hoped once I snap it in place. And if I plug a USB cord into this thing, it seems to be doing exactly what it's supposed to and charging. So yeah, doesn't seem to cause any problems, the fact that this is absolutely caked in and basically powder coated after being in the smoker all that time. So that's about it. I'd think that for the price, it's probably a pretty good deal. Some of the more high-end wireless meat thermometers can run quite a bit more money, and I think that for the price, this one will probably do everything that the average or beginner barbecuer or smoker probably needs. For now, I feel a little bit inclined to still use this particular meat thermometer in tandem with my wired probe thermometer, just until I get the hang of it a little better and have a more thorough understanding of the disparity and the differences between the readings for each of them. But at the end of the day, it worked as advertised and gave me real-time temperature readings for both the internal temp of that pork and the ambient temperature of the inside of the smoker. And if you want to check out the VicSeed wireless probe meat thermometer for yourself, I'll put a link in the video description below. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date with all our latest stuff, including future barbecuing and product review videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm John, and this is Great Lakes Country.